This is a fictionalized story inspired by real cases of animals in distress on remote mountain terrain and the difficult decisions faced by those who discover them. While the specific events and characters are created for storytelling, the survival challenges, rescue dynamics, and emotional realities explored here reflect documented patterns in mountain rescue cases. The black speck hadn't moved in 20 minutes. Elizabeth lowered her binoculars, her hands trembling in the thin mountain air at 13,000 feet. She'd been watching that dark shape on the snowfield below, maybe 300 feet down a near vertical slope, trying to convince herself it was just debris. A torn backpack, a piece of abandoned gear, shadow playing tricks in the harsh alpine sunlight. But debris didn't make sounds, and she'd heard it, faint, almost lost in the wind whistling through the rocky peaks, but unmistakable once her brain registered what it was. Barking. "That's impossible," her partner said when she told him. "There's no way a dog is down there. How would it even—" The sound came again, weaker this time, desperate. Elizabeth's stomach dropped as understanding crashed over her. This was a popular route to the summit. People brought their dogs, and the terrain here, exposed edges, corniced snow that looked solid until you stepped on it, drop-offs that appeared without warning. A dog could fall. She brought the binoculars back up, hands shaking so badly now she could barely focus. Scanned the steep snowfield until she found the speck again, and this time, magnified and clear, she saw it move. Not wind, not imagination. The shape shifted slightly, and Elizabeth's breath caught in her throat. That was a living creature down there, on a 40-degree snow slope, 600 feet below where it should have been, with 2,000 feet of nothing beneath it if it slid any further. "We have to do something," Elizabeth whispered. Her partner checked his phone. No signal. They were too high, too remote. "We'd have to hike 3 hours down to call for help. Then mountain rescue would need to mobilize, get up here." He looked at the sky where storm clouds were building. "That's 6 hours minimum, if they can even respond before the weather hits." 6 hours. Elizabeth looked back at the speck, at the shape that had somehow survived a fall that should have killed it, that was lying injured and alone on exposed snow, unable to move, slowly dying from shock and exposure and injuries she couldn't even see from this distance. 6 hours might as well be forever. "I'm going down there," Elizabeth heard herself say. "That's technical terrain, steep ice, one slip and you're going down that couloir with the dog. We don't have rescue equipment. We're not trained for—" "I don't care," Elizabeth interrupted, her voice breaking. "Something's down there suffering, and I'm not walking away." She looked at the snowfield, at the impossible distance, at the risk that made her hand shake and her throat tight. And she started pulling rope from her pack. If you want to know what happened next on that mountain, if you've ever wondered what you'd do when faced with impossible choices, subscribe right now. This channel tells real stories about the weight of compassion, not fairy tales. Hit subscribe. You need to see how this ends. Now, back to Elizabeth. They worked fast, rigging up a lay system with climbing rope anchored to rock outcroppings. Elizabeth's fingers fumbled with carabiners. Her partner set up a 3-to-1 pulley configuration that would let her lower her down, then haul her back up. If it's already dead, you leave it. If it's alive but too injured to move safely, you mark the location and we go for professional help. We're not heroes, understood? Elizabeth clipped into the rope, gripped her ice axe. Understood. But they both knew she was lying. The descent started gradually. Elizabeth walked backward down the steep snow, her partner feeding rope through the belay system. The first 30 feet weren't terrible. She kicked steps into consolidated snow, used her ice axe for balance. Then the angle increased. The snow turned to ice beneath the surface. Elizabeth's boots started sliding between steps. Her ice axe barely penetrated. She could feel herself relying entirely on the rope, her own purchase on the slope almost worthless. 40 feet down, 50 feet down, the speck was getting closer, resolving into shape. Elizabeth's heart hammered against her ribs. Please be alive, please be alive, please. She could see it clearly now. A dog, medium-sized, dark fur matted with ice and snow, lying on its side, not moving. Elizabeth's throat closed. She was too late. All this risk, all this fear for an animal that had already... Then she saw the chest rise, fall, rise again, breathing. "It's alive!" Elizabeth shouted, her voice cracking. Tears froze on her cheeks. "It's breathing." She traversed across the slope now, moving laterally toward where the dog lay. Every step was calculated terror. Below her, the snowfield dropped 2,000 feet into shadows she couldn't see the bottom of. One mistake, one moment of lost concentration, and she'd slide into that void. 20 feet from the dog, 15 feet, 10 feet. Close enough now to see details that made her chest physically hurt. The dog was large, maybe 60 pounds at healthy weight, some kind of shepherd mix. His fur was dark brown, almost black, matted with ice and snow. One rear leg was bent at an angle that was absolutely wrong. The animal's ribcage showed through its coat. Its stomach was torn, abraded raw from sliding across rock and ice during the fall. But it was the eyes that destroyed Elizabeth. Wide, terrified, glazed with pain and shock and confusion. The dog's head lifted slightly when it saw her, turned toward her approach, and its tail moved. Just the tiniest wag, a flicker of movement that said, despite everything, despite the pain, despite the terror, despite falling 600 feet and lying broken on a mountain, this animal's instinct when seeing a human was still to wag its tail. Elizabeth's vision blurred. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think past the overwhelming weight of what she was seeing. This dog had trusted someone, had loved someone, had been brought up this mountain by someone who was supposed to protect it, and somehow it had ended up here, alone, dying. "Hey," Elizabeth whispered, her voice shaking. "Hey, buddy, I've got you. You're going to be okay." The dog whimpered, a sound so small, so pitiful, so full of pain that Elizabeth had to bite her lip to keep from sobbing. She knelt on the ice, planted her axe deep, secured her position, pulled off her gloves despite the cold because she needed to feel, needed to assess injuries with bare hands. The dog flinched when she touched its hind leg, definitely fractured. Its stomach showed deep abrasions, skin torn away, bleeding slowly. Its paws were destroyed, pads shredded from trying to gain purchase during the fall. Its body temperature was too low, hypothermia setting in. But it was alert, responsive, looking at her with those terrified eyes that still somehow held hope, which meant Elizabeth could move it, had to move it, because leaving it here was a death sentence. She pulled her emergency blanket from her pack, spread it on the snow. "This is going to hurt," she told the dog. Her hands were shaking. "I'm so sorry, but I have to get you out of here." The dog cried out when Elizabeth shifted it onto the blanket, a sharp, agonized sound that echoed across the empty mountain and cut through Elizabeth like a knife. But the animal didn't bite her, didn't fight, just trembled and whimpered and looked at her with eyes that said, "Please help me. Please don't leave me. Please." Elizabeth wrapped the blanket around the dog's body, creating a sling, tied it with every piece of cord she had, then looked up at the rope, at the steep ice above, at the impossible distance back to safety. She was about to ask her partner to haul not just her weight, but her weight plus 60 pounds of injured dog on terrain where anchor failure meant both of them sliding to their deaths. "I'm bringing her up," Elizabeth shouted. A long pause, then her partner's voice, faint and tight. "Are you absolutely sure?" Elizabeth looked down at the dog, at the way its chest heaved with each labored breath, at the tiny tail movement when their eyes met. "I'm sure," she called back. She strapped the dog against her chest and back, distributing weight as evenly as possible. The animal's body pressed against hers, cold even through layers of blanket and jacket. She could feel its rapid heartbeat, could feel every tremor of pain that ran through it. "You're okay," Elizabeth gasped between breaths. "Almost there. You're going to be okay." She didn't know if she was lying. 20 feet from the top, Elizabeth's leg muscles started giving out. The altitude made every breath inadequate. Black spots danced in her vision. The dog's weight felt like it was crushing her ribs. "Keep moving!" Elizabeth shouted desperately. "Weather's moving in." Elizabeth looked up, saw clouds rolling over the summit. The temperature was dropping, wind picking up. 10 feet. The dog cried out, sharp and agonized. Elizabeth had bumped its fractured leg against her pack. Guilt flooded through her, but she couldn't stop, couldn't adjust, had to just keep moving. 5 feet. Her partner grabbed her harness and pulled. Elizabeth scrambled over the edge onto more stable ground and collapsed immediately, the dog still strapped to her chest, both of them shaking. For a long moment, she just lay there, feeling the dog's heartbeat against hers, feeling the mountains cold seeping through her sweat-soaked clothes, feeling the weight of what she'd just done settling over her like an avalanche. "We need to move now," her partner said. "Storm's here. We've got maybe 40 minutes to get below tree line." Elizabeth nodded, couldn't speak yet. They fashioned a new carrying system, wrapped the dog in sleeping bags and emergency blankets, rigged it into a backpack carry. The dog had gone quiet, too quiet, had stopped whimpering. Elizabeth didn't know if that was shock or exhaustion or something worse. The descent from the summit took 90 minutes that felt like 90 years. Elizabeth's legs shook with every step. Her shoulders burned from the weight. Snow started falling at 12,000 feet, real snow, the storm they'd been racing. By 11,000 feet, visibility had dropped to maybe 50 yards. By 10,000 feet, Elizabeth was moving on pure survival instinct, one foot, then the other. Don't think about the weight. Don't think about the pain. Don't think about whether the dog strapped to your back is still breathing. Just move. When they finally reached the trailhead, Elizabeth couldn't remember the last mile, couldn't remember getting to the truck, could only remember her partner's voice saying, "I called ahead, vet's waiting, emergency services ready." They loaded the dog into Elizabeth's truck with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. Elizabeth drove 40 minutes to the clinic. Her partner rode in back with the dog. Neither of them spoke. There was too much to process, too much weight. The veterinary clinic appeared like salvation. Staff rushed out with a stretcher, transferred the dog with practiced efficiency. Severe dehydration, multiple abrasions, fractured femur, possible internal injuries, signs of hypothermia. We need to stabilize her immediately. "Do whatever it takes," Elizabeth interrupted. Her voice sounded like someone else's, distant, broken. "Money doesn't matter. Just save her." Her. Elizabeth didn't know why she'd said that, but it felt right. The vet looked at Elizabeth with something that might have been understanding or might have been pity. "You should know, injuries like this, from that kind of fall, recovery is long, expensive, complicated. Even if we stabilize her tonight, she might have permanent issues, mobility problems, trauma-induced behavioral changes. PTSD in animals is real." "I don't care," Elizabeth said, and meant it with every fiber of her being. "Just save her." They wheeled the dog inside. Elizabeth stood in the parking lot as snow fell around her. Her partner put a hand on her shoulder. "You saved her life," he said quietly. Elizabeth didn't feel like a hero. She felt like someone who'd made a choice she didn't fully understand, who'd committed to something whose weight she was only beginning to feel. The dog, if she survived surgery, if she survived the night, if she survived recovery, would need somewhere to go, would need someone willing to handle ongoing medical care, possible behavioral trauma, all the complications the vet had warned about. Elizabeth thought about her one-bedroom apartment, about her budget that didn't have room for thousands in vet bills, about her life that was manageable before this morning. She thought about that tail wag on the mountain, that moment of trust from an animal that should have had none left. "I'm staying," Elizabeth said, "until she's out of surgery." "Elizabeth!" "I'm staying." Her partner didn't argue. The surgery took 4 hours. Elizabeth sat in the waiting room, still wearing her blood-stained hiking clothes, still covered in the dog's blood and her own sweat and mountain ice that had melted into her jacket. She researched on her phone, read about femoral fractures, about hypothermia recovery, about trauma in animals, about rehabilitation timelines. Every article made it look harder, more expensive, more complicated. She kept reading. When the vet finally emerged, Elizabeth stood so fast she almost fell. "She made it through," the vet said, and Elizabeth's legs gave out. She sat hard in the plastic chair. Tears came then, all the fear and adrenaline and terror from the mountain flooding out in sobs she couldn't control. "She's stable," the vet continued. "We've set the fracture, treated the abrasions, addressed the hypothermia. She's on IV fluids and pain medication, but—" the vet hesitated. "Next 48 hours are critical. Infection risk is high with those open wounds. We don't know yet if there's internal bleeding, and psychologically—" Another pause. "She's traumatized, severely. When she wakes up, we'll see how she responds." "What does that mean?" "Some animals recover and return to normal behavior. Others develop lasting fear, anxiety, aggression from self-protection. We won't know until she comes around." Elizabeth understood. The dog might not be the same dog who'd wagged her tail on that mountain, might never be that dog again. "Can I see her?" The vet led Elizabeth to recovery. The dog lay on a warming pad, wrapped in blankets, tubes running from her leg. Her eyes were closed. The fractured leg was splinted, heavily bandaged. The abrasions on her stomach were cleaned and dressed. She looked small, broken, nothing like the animal who'd survived a 600-foot fall. Elizabeth pulled a chair close, sat, put her hand where the dog could see it if she opened her eyes. "Hey," Elizabeth whispered. "You made it. You're safe now. I promise you're safe." The dog's eyes stayed closed, but her chest rose and fell, steady, alive. Elizabeth stayed there for 6 hours. Her partner brought food she couldn't eat, brought clean clothes she didn't change into, finally left to get sleep, promising to return in the morning. Elizabeth didn't move from that chair. At 2 a.m., the dog's eyes opened. For a moment, they just looked at each other. The dog's eyes were unfocused, clouded with sedation and pain, but aware, present. Then the dog's tail moved, just once, a tiny thump against the blanket, and Elizabeth understood with absolute clarity that she wasn't leaving this animal, wasn't walking away, wasn't handing her off to whoever might adopt her eventually. This dog was hers now. The weight of that decision settled over Elizabeth like the mountain itself. The financial burden, the time commitment, the emotional investment in something that might never fully heal. She thought about all the logical reasons to walk away, to let the shelter take over once the dog was stable, to return to her manageable life. Then she looked at those eyes, at the trust there despite every reason to have none. "You're coming home with me," Elizabeth whispered. "When you're ready, however long that takes, you're mine now." The dog's tail moved again, and Elizabeth knew, despite the fear and the uncertainty and the massive commitment she'd just made, that this was the only choice she could live with. The dog stayed in intensive care for 8 days. Elizabeth visited every day, sometimes twice, sitting beside the recovery cage, talking softly, letting the dog see her face, smell her hand, understand she wasn't alone. The vet had warned about behavioral trauma, and it was there. The dog flinched at loud sounds, trembled when strangers approached, had to be sedated for bandage changes because panic made her thrash despite the pain it caused her fractured leg. But with Elizabeth, she was different. When Elizabeth's voice filled the recovery room, the dog's ears would perk, her tail would thump, the trembling would ease. "She's bonded to you," the vet said on day 5. "You're her safe person, the one who came for her on that mountain." "Can I adopt her?" Elizabeth asked, even though saying it out loud made the commitment terrifyingly real. The vet smiled. "I was hoping you'd ask. She's going to need someone patient, someone committed. Recovery is going to be months, not weeks. Physical therapy for the leg, ongoing pain management, behavioral support for the trauma. It's not going to be easy." "I know," Elizabeth said. And she did. She'd already calculated the costs, the time, the changes to her life. She was doing it anyway. Elizabeth brought the dog home 3 weeks after the mountain. She'd named her Mesa, after the mountain, after the place where everything had changed. The first night was terrible. Mesa couldn't climb stairs to Elizabeth's second-floor apartment. Elizabeth carried her, all 60 pounds of her, up 2 flights, her own muscles screaming in protest. Mesa wouldn't eat, wouldn't drink, just lay on the dog bed Elizabeth had bought, trembling, eyes wide and terrified. Elizabeth slept on the floor beside her, just so she wouldn't be alone. By the second week, Mesa would eat if Elizabeth sat beside her, would drink if Elizabeth encouraged her, would let Elizabeth change her bandages without sedation. By the 4th week, Mesa's tail wagged when Elizabeth came home from work. By the 8th week, Mesa could put weight on her healing leg, could walk slowly, carefully, with a limp that might be permanent. By the 12th week, Mesa slept in Elizabeth's bed, pressed against her side, safe. The behavioral issues remained. Mesa panicked during thunderstorms, couldn't be around other dogs without fear aggression, had nightmares where she'd whimper and kick in her sleep until Elizabeth woke her gently. Physical therapy was 3 times a week, expensive, time-consuming, essential. The vet bills accumulated, thousands of dollars. Elizabeth adjusted her budget, cut expenses, made it work. Because Mesa wasn't just a dog she'd rescued. Mesa was the choice Elizabeth had made on a mountain when logic said walk away, when safety said don't risk it, when practicality said not your problem. Mesa was the moment Elizabeth had chosen compassion over convenience. And every morning when Mesa's tail wagged at seeing her, Elizabeth knew it was the right choice, even with the difficulty, even with the cost, even with the permanent changes to her life. Some decisions aren't about logic. They're about who you are when faced with impossible choices. Elizabeth had learned that on a mountain. Mesa reminded her every single day. 6 months after the rescue, Elizabeth returned to that mountain. She hiked the same trail, reached the same summit, stood at the edge where she'd looked down and seen a black speck on the snow. The snowfield was empty now, just pristine white slope disappearing into shadows. But Elizabeth could still see it, could still see herself descending on that rope, could still feel the weight of the dog against her chest, could still remember the moment she'd looked into those terrified eyes and made a choice that defied every rational thought. She pulled out her phone, took a photo of Mesa from that morning, lying in a patch of sunlight in the apartment, tail mid-wag, eyes bright and healthy and full of the trust that had nearly destroyed Elizabeth the first time she'd seen it. Mesa would never summit this mountain again. Her injured leg wouldn't allow it. The trauma wouldn't allow it. But she was alive, safe, loved, and that was enough. Elizabeth turned away from the edge and started the descent. She had a dog waiting at home. This story, while fictionalized, reflects patterns seen in thousands of mountain rescue and animal abandonment cases. The medical realities, trauma responses, and recovery challenges described here are based on documented veterinary and rescue data. If you found this story meaningful, if the survival information, the rehabilitation details, or the weight of the decision resonated with you, subscribe for more stories that educate while they engage. These aren't fairy tales. They're explorations of real compassion and real consequences. Comment below if you face similar choices, unexpected rescues, fostering that became permanent, or moments when doing the right thing meant sacrificing the easy thing. Your experiences matter. Thank you for watching.